Welcome to Finance in Control Expert Conversations, where we explore how modern finance leaders are navigating complexity and technology in a rapidly changing world. Today, I'm joined by Tristan Pellau, a seasoned fintech leader and a strategic thinker who has been at the intersection of financial innovation, capital allocation, and emerging technology trends. Tristan brings a thoughtful perspective on where real structural change is happening in fintech and where we might just be seeing a lot of noise and hype. So, Tristan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's get started at a high level. When you look at the fintech landscape today, where do you see real structural change happening versus just a hype cycle, like a short-term hype cycle in general in the fintech landscape?
Um, I think what's been interesting, and it's with the same trend in fintech than in the rest of the tech world, because sometimes I see strong parallels between where tech and software are going and then where fintech is going. I think we've seen a fragmentation of the value chain. There's lots of companies going in after very specific piece of the banking sector, of the insurance sector, more generally of financial services. And so it fragmented, and now it's bundling again and
Mhm.
integrating again, and companies diversifying because they realize that doing one thing very niche is great, but you can't scale that much. And I think that it's an ongoing trend that I've seen it for a few years, and it will continue, which means that basically you go from a lot of specialist fintech companies to much more, generalist, and then ultimately it means consolidation because not everybody can do the same thing with the same customer. So I would say this is my big underlying trend that whatever the noise is still gonna happen over time.
Agree 100%. I think scaling is exactly the problem when you see such fragmented solutions out there. Now, let's talk a little bit about embedded finance. That's a term that's coming up, and also
Mm.
AI driven automation, real time payments. Um, which of these are durable shifts versus you think these are like overcapitalized? Like, AI driven automation definitely, is bringing a lot of value to customers and especially in the real time payments method. Do you see this shift actually capitalizing in the future? And is this, you think this is just going to be a trend?
Um, Embedded finance, definitely embedded everything, embedded, lending, embedded payments. I think that overall we've gone from the financial part is too visible to it's becoming invisible, and focusing much more on what the customer journey is about. And now the technology is here to do that all the way up to even more complex lending, given that the technology is here to have real-time decision on lending. So that's definitely going to stay and accelerate, and you're going to see it in every customer journey. Um, Everything that has to do with AI and automation, I think it does bring a lot of value.
Mhm.
And AI for me has put back the focus on, let's say, simple automation, as in
Mhm.
businesses are now exploring AI and then realizing that actually not simpler, but regular automation could do it. And they're looking a bit more at the space and automating lots of processes that should have been automated years ago without AI, but still it puts the good focus on that. However, I mean, on the flip side here, I see that there's a lot of noise, a
Mhm.
lot of expectations are a bit uh, too big, and especially in the short term, right? As we say, you're overestimating in the short term and underestimating in the long term. And right now we're in the overestimation phase.
I completely agree. I think there's a lot of expectations when you combine AI with automation. Now, let's talk a little bit about AI specifically now that we are on that topic. Everyone says, AI is it transforming the finance, but what does that actually mean in practical terms, right? Like, I want to know from you, where is AI genuinely improving in financial decision making? And if see AI influencing the how you see AI influencing the behavior in the next 3 to 5 years, um, expectations versus reality, and how is that improving the financial decision making, making CFO's life a little
Mm.
better?
Um, as I tend to say, I think I see the best use cases for now in the boring stuff, fraud
Hmm.
detection, compliance, um, all that requires going through a lot of data very fast, real time, hopefully. Um, and these are the big ones because banks or financial service companies still do spend a lot of money on fraud every year and on anti money laundering, on fraud detection, and still it goes through and they have to to pay large amounts. So they still lose money. So whatever here I think is very strong. Um, on looking at, of course, it requires businesses to do all the right plumbing at first. But if you think about how you could connect the data and have a much better view of customer behavior by feeding models with relevant, all the relevant data to see uh, patterns and behaviors that are hard to see if you just, or you can see them, but always looking back. And I think that if you have dynamic systems where you can see this pattern, see these behaviors real time and kind of trying to predict where customers are going, when you're losing a customer, even before they know it. I think this is,
Yeah.
and it's not sci-fi. I was doing this kind of stuff 10 years ago, but right now
Mhm.
the technology is really ripe for doing it at scale.
You are 100% right. We were correlating data a couple of years ago as well, connecting all that. But what AI is helping with, right now, the way and influencing CFOs and other operations teams is to connect that data, and have a much better view of your own customers, their behaviors. How do you connect the dots and have better decisions on behalf of the team? I think that's a really good takeaway. In the same realm of AI, let's talk a little bit about agentic AI, right? What does that mean for finance teams? How are finance teams receiving it? And how is that adding value to them? And you did mention that it's fragmented, and there are different problems out there. But as a whole, talk a little bit about agentic AI, and
Hmm.
what do you think finances teams are receiving about it?
Yes, I think agentic AI is probably in the realm of AI where there is most hype and very high expectations in
Mhm.
terms of what it will deliver and how you would replace people. Um, I see the use cases being in the tasks that are very repetitive in finance teams still. Everything that has to do with invoicing, reconciliation, accounts payable, um, all the things that you would give to junior, basically. I think these are the first big possible gains so that the CFOs, the finance team, can focus really on the strategic aspects and not just chasing the cash flow. Um, and all these layers being really automated, but you could automate it already. However, it's not so smart, right? That if the number is not here, then the invoice is not going out.
Mhm.
If the VAT is wrong, then it's not able to. So I could see how here you could have agents being able to handle all this um, time-consuming
Mhm.
tasks in the end that are eating a lot of the bandwidth of finance teams, where they could focus much more on all this, also using AI, but all these other aspects of analytics on predicting cash flow, predicting issues, assessing risks, and really uh, moving from, let's call it, financial management to strategic
Mhm.
finance, so being much more connected to the strategy and have a vision in the future of how you really support the business rather than just barely enabling it.
Absolutely agree with you there. And I like the way you summarized it, like moving from financial management to the strategic finance, and most importantly, how the agents can take care of the time consuming tasks, the mundane tasks, right? And have the team focus on the more strategic initiatives. And that's exactly, I think, what a lot of finance leaders are struggling with. Now, in that context, do you think, in the context of AI and agentic agents, do you think the finance teams will shrink in size in the future? Or do you think they will remain the same and be more strategic? Like, do you see a team of 10 people going to five now that we have agents and we don't need as many people? Or do you think we do need 10 of them, but we will be more efficient and strategic in the future?
Mm. Um, I think it goes back to that very point, which is what do you want to do with that team?
Mhm.
Is the scope of the team still the same, doing Google accounting and financial management? Well, maybe then it shrinks. If you restructure a bit, like the scope being much more a business partner, enabling the strategy, and much more focus on the strategy of the business. I think generally businesses are not very good at strategy execution. So for me, the finance teams are always the ones that should be enabling it, but they
Mhm.
are often too busy trying to run the business and do not have enough bandwidth to actually think strategically with the rest of
Mhm.
the functions on you know, how do you get the right resources for a product? Um, you know, uh, how do you make sure that the costs are not running out of hand in tech, in marketing? So, but this you need time, right? Is it, and it's too much reactive and not often not enough proactive. Um, so I would say it will be very, it will be dependent on where we see the function going. I think there
Mhm.
is a big opportunity to actually not shrink the teams and do this cost saving for cost saving, but actually repurposing the people to do a more, well, not more fun job, but actually much more helpful job to the rest of the organization.
Absolutely. I agree on that. Um, a slight shift in that context towards real-time spend intelligence. Now, do you think real-time spend intelligence becomes foundational in AI native finance stack? When I say real-time, again, we talked about automation, we talked about visibility,
Mm.
spend management, kind of shifting into spend intelligence. Do you think that's going to be a foundational in that AI native sort of that narrative?
Um, I think as long as it feeds into predictive analytics,
Mm-hmm.
then yes. Otherwise, it's just a feed that refreshes faster, and then faster that you're spending money. But
Mm-hmm.
what what the real value is for me is knowing knowing that underlying trend, oh, you're spending much more,
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Yeah.
constant nudges on, well, okay, this is a worrying trend. This you should address. This you should adjust. And with real-time data and with more uh, with um, faster decision making in terms of knowing where you're going and trying to adjust. So for me, if it's not coupled with a view towards the future, then it adds, in my view, not a lot of value because it's just, you know, you have a better view right now instead of, knowing every hour or every 5 hours, you know it every minute.
Mhm.
Okay, but actually, what does it tell me on where we're going to be next week, next month, next
Yeah.
year? So this is a real value for me.
100%. I think what you said is it has to tie to predictive analysis and how is it helping the teams understand the patterns of spending, not just of the person, but also the team at an organizational level. So as long as it's all connected to the predictive analysis and and it's giving you an insight of that's the intelligence part, right? Of how things are being spent last year versus this year and what are some of the trends in the future. I think that's what you're trying to say, is where the real value is. And I think that's a great answer. Um, you've spoken about behavioral finance, right? We talked about modern systems, and this is all how real-time analytics, AI, behavioral finance, and money, decision making based on that. I I want to ask you what blind spots do you think finance leaders commonly have when they are evaluating risks or growth, even with all these AI tools kind of shaping up and as they are evolving. But what do you think there are still some blind spots or some places where these finance teams are still like being caught off guard and not being able to do anything with it?
Um, so I see two very concrete examples.
Mm-hmm.
One is kind of this cost creep where we now have most businesses running on tons of subscriptions of ton of softwares. Um, it's great to have SaaS, but they have no control over the actual spend in a year
Mm-hmm.
because basically the things evolve very quickly, an update of TNCs, and then suddenly, you pay $2 or $3 more per user. And I've seen businesses first with too many tools
Mm-hmm.
and teams taking up tools, and then basically you end up like with the cost of running the business increasing, plus the variability of this cost. So yeah, we've gone from I'm using one software company to provide me all my needs. I have the control of the cost. I know how much it's going to cost per user for the next year. To instead, I'm going to use 50 different specialized platforms that will vary in cost depending on users, blah blah. And then basically it varies too much. And finance teams, I've seen have a hard time uh, understanding how many are used everywhere, and also what is the evolution of the cost. And they can't know because actually even the users don't. So this is one concrete example, and I've seen it many times over the past few years. Um, and then secondly is, again, to my point earlier, when teams don't have the time to be strategic, then they're cut from the strategic planning. So they're just coming after in, okay, how we're going to finance all that. And they don't input enough into, so they're just as as a mechanism at the end to verify that it all makes sense instead of coming up with really a counterbalance on the whole strategic planning and do their real job, which is budgeting and helping like really cost the projects and make sure that actually all the resources are here to deliver on the strategy. And so these are two things where and they're blind here because they don't have the time. So the first one is blind because everybody's blind with these things, and the second one is they're blind because they don't dedicate the time to do this.
Absolutely. I love that answer. What I'm hearing is, number one, how the cost creeps in and how maintaining your teams and businesses become expensive because you have
mm,
just so many tools you have subscribed to. You have a tool for everything, and you have all these subscriptions running, and there is no platform that is kind of connecting or tying everything together. Now you are running a super expensive, finance operations team, and you need this, you need that, you need everything. And number two,
mm,
the teams themselves are just tied up with the day-to-day work. The resources are being tied up with things that could have been automated, and and feels like that are important today, but eventually, how this is just time consuming and the resources are being allocated in the wrong place. Great answers. Thank you so much for that, Tristan. I think this has been incredibly insightful, especially your perspective on the structural changes versus the hype. And I think what you have pointed out are really practical blind spots that people are facing today, but they don't realize. I think the fragmentation
mm.
of the market and the tools is a big thing. There's a tool for everything, and everyone's just tied up in that cycle of just reusing those tools. So thank you so much for that. If listeners want, or people who are watching this want to follow your work and connect with you, where would you think would be the best place to do that?
Probably on LinkedIn would be a good place. Otherwise, going to Fintech Review and subscribing to the newsletter FRW, where I share more ideas about strategy and capital allocation and how the financial service industry is moving.
Absolutely. I've been following FinTech Review, and it has been super helpful. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you all for joining the conversation. And if this conversation helped you rethink where FinTech and finance teams are heading towards, stay tuned for more expert discussions on how finance leaders can move from control to intelligence. Thank you.